Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvisha Vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let me quickly read the first 5 verses. Rupam Drishyam Lochanam Drik Tadrishyam Driktu Manasam Drishyadhi Vrittaya Sakshi Drigeva Natu Drishyate Nilapita Sthula Sukshma Rasva Dirghadi Bhedataha Nana Vidhani Bhutan Nana Vidhani Rupani Pashyet Lochaname Kadha Andhyamandhya Patutveshu Netra Dharmeshu Chaikadha Sankalpayen Manaha Shrotra Tvagadau Yojyatamidam Kama Sankalpa Sandehau Shraddha Shraddhe Dhrititare Hrir Dhir Bhirityeva Madin Bhasayetyekadhachitihi Nodetina Astameti Esha Navriddhim Yati Nakshayam Swayam Vibhatyatha Anyani Bhasayet Sadhanam Vina. So this is a text which is a beautiful text that simply allows you to look at yourself and analyze the constituents of your experience, your life, and by doing so come up to some amazing conclusion, amazing insight. And so this is very possible, even though we have a hard time understanding how someone can tell us something about myself that I don't already know. You know, this is an interesting conundrum that someone says, listen, I can tell you who you are, and I don't even know you. And so you doubt that statement because you feel that I'm the one that has been living with myself all my life. I should know myself better than anyone else. And here's this perfect stranger who comes in and he says, you don't know the facts about yourself as you should. How is that possible? So it is entirely possible. It can be done. Because we sometimes need to have expert advice. You know, like even within our own body we may have some medical issues, and we are incapable of really understanding what's happening to me, and so I need a doctor to examine me and tell me this is the situation, and then I accept it. It's if the doctor is reputable and so on, then I accept the advice. Similarly, it is said, for instance, I think I gave this example in the new Purusha Suktam class, so I'll repeat that here also. That's very possible that you may have a Ayurvedic doctor visiting you, the one who is very expert in Ayurveda, and you're having some issues with your skin or something like that. And so you invite him to your home. And he comes in, he looks at a tree growing in your front yard, and he says, oh my gosh, this is a very rare tree. has it been with you for, he says, yes, this has been with us for 20, 30 years. So he says, do you know what this tree is all about? So I say, I don't know much about it. It's a tree. It gives shade to us, and we have to clean up some fallen leaves, and that was about all I can do. He says, no, I have no idea. He says, this is one of the most important trees in the Ayurvedic tradition. We actually use the bark of it for making some concoction. We can make this. We can take seeds. He goes on, and so on. He says, this is actually very helpful to you for your health, and you can use it for that purpose. So here's an example of someone that. Here's an example of a situation where, even though I'm looking at it, but I am not understanding the amazing capability of something. So very similar cases to really our case. So at this point in time, I feel that I'm, as a normal person with body and mind, and I'm aware of the fact that my constituents are slowly deteriorating, and they will come to an end, and so will I. Because I am really consisting of my constituents and so on and so forth, and I will, as a Jivatma, I will also die, and so be it. What can I do? There's nothing else. I find no one else can escape this, and I can't escape it either. I don't like it, but what am I supposed to do? So here the Shastra says, wait. You have no idea what you've got. Your mahima, your potential is unlimited. It's the best that creation can have. You are completely independent. And so I say, really? How is that possible? So in that sense, I think this book is a very interesting one, in the sense that it allows you, and so the Shastra says, okay, let's just look at your own constituents and let's analyze it. And you can already see some insight. You don't have to go through reading Upanishads and this, that, or the other. Just examine, no examination of God and other things. You just examine yourself. This is the beauty about this, such a text, wonderful text. So here, it gives you really the insight of this discriminative knowledge from the very first verse itself. He says, Rupam Drshyam Lochanam Drik. He says, let's look at it, that there is in fact a sequence. The sequence is that in order to look at the experiences of forms, you need a singularity of an eye to really make a distinction between this is red, this is blue, this is long, this is short, etc., etc. And then the same thing with sounds and smells and so on and so forth. And so this functions as an observer. Your eye functions as an observer. But the interesting thing is that the observer also becomes the observed. So please make a note of it. The note is that even though it's primarily an observer, but it can also turn into an observed. So now you say, okay, this is a new rule. An observer is not always an observer, but it can also be observed. And then it says that mind is the observer. And so there is a sequence. Then the mind also is not always an observer. That also becomes an observed. So you say, okay, that's an interesting confirmation of the fact that whenever you have an observer, it has the potential of becoming an observed. But now this rule is broken. He says, Then in the second one, so the first one was Rupam Drishyam Lochanam Drik Tad Drishyam Driktu Manasam Drishyaha Dhivrittaya Sakshi. So now we have a Sakshi who is also now an observer. But now that rule is broken. This Sakshi, instead of also becoming an observed, never becomes an observed. It always remains as a observer. So this is the starting point of the analysis, and if you follow the direction of this analysis, you reach an amazing conclusion that we are going to now develop over the course of this whole book. So here, the Sakshi definition of a Sakshi. Sakshi actually means a witness. Normally, a Sakshi means a witness. Like you ask somebody, there was a dispute, and so did anybody witness the dispute to see who started this and so on? So you have to say yes, somebody was witnessing this. So this is the normal meaning of Sakshi. Here, however, in the Shastric view, the teaching of Vedanta, teaching of Vedas, Sakshi has a very precise meaning. Yes, it can be a witness. Of course it is a witness. But, and I think Swami Viditatmananda ji gives this in, I think page 26, I was looking at it. The definition of Sakshi is Sakshat Ananya Apekshaya Ikshate Prakashayati iti Sakshi. Sakshat Ananya Apekshaya Ikshate Prakashayati iti Sakshi. Sakshi is one. Sakshat means directly, without any aid, without any filter, directly. Ananya apekshaya. Ananya apeksha means without the help of anything else, not with respect to, there's no conditional, unconditionally. One that unconditionally, directly, ikshate. Ikshate means to see. Prakashayati, one who illumines. That entity is called a Sakshi. So here, let us be introduced to two words. I really should have had a card here to show you, but maybe I'll do that next week. So there are two words that we should understand very well in this whole analysis. This is an important thing about analysis about ourselves, who am I, and so on. The two words are Swarupa and Swabhava. Swarupa and Swabhava. Swarupa means the nature of something. The intrinsic nature of something is called Swarupa. And I'll give you examples in a minute. Let me just define both the words. Swabhava means the way it operates. It is not the nature. You can even say that Swarupa is a person and Swabhava is the personality. Personality of the person. That is one way to look at it. But really, more importantly, let's go into this very precisely. Swabhava means this is the way it behaves. It may not be its nature, but this is the way it behaves. So, for example, take the case of a highly conductive surface like iron, steel, and the case of fire. So now you can see how these two words apply. The heat of the fire is its swarupa. The heat of an iron vessel is its swabhava. So for instance, a wood does not get heated unless it burns, but you can touch a wood in midday sun and it won't be hot. It won't be hot. So the swabhava of the wood is that it doesn't conduct heat very well. A metal, on the other hand, has a swabhava that it can conduct heat very well. So there is a distinction between swabhava and swarupa. Now you cannot use those words for fire, that the fire conducts heat very well. It is the very swarupa of the fire, of the heat. Whereas a metallic object is the swabhava. And so similarly here also you can say that the swarupa of the fire is that it illumines by its very nature. Whereas a metallic object can emanate light. At first it emanates heat, but eventually if you keep on heating it, it becomes so bright that it itself can also emanate light. So the illumination property of an iron is the swabhava. The illuminating process, the illuminating property of fire is its swarupa. Now we can apply it to our own bodies. This principle, this understanding of the distinction between swarupa and swabhava can be applied to ourselves. So Sakshi, in the very first verse he says, Dhivrittayaha. So what was the first word? Drsyaha dhivrittayaha. So all the various forms of the mind are drsya. What are the forms of the mind? This is given in verse number 4. Kama, sankalpa, sandeha, shraddha, ashraddha. Various forms of the mind. These are shown to be, they are shown by the Sakshi. And so, the ability of the mind to illuminate, let me ask you a question. Do you think is it swarupa or swabhava? It is swabhava. So up until the Sakshi, the ability to illuminate, for example, the eyes can illuminate forms. The ears can illuminate words and sounds. The sense of touch can tell, is it hot or not? Is it soft or not? All those kinds of things. Similarly, the sense of smell can say, is this a pleasant smell or an unpleasant smell? All those kinds of things are the ability to illuminate all these sense organs. Is that the swabhava or the swarupa? It is the swabhava. Why? Because it is very possible that your eyes may see, but they don't really see. So this is interesting that sometimes if the eyes are defective, they don't see at all. They see partially. Mandya, andya, mandya. Or if they don't see at all, then if they are defective, then they become blind. Or if they are not blind, but they become ineffective to see properly without the help of some glasses, then their ability to illuminate becomes changing, depends on other things. And the example that Swami Viditatmananda gave, which is a good one, or we are very familiar with that, is that sometimes the eyes, let's say ears, that's a better example in this case. The ears are not hearing properly, even though they are hearing perfectly, they are capable of hearing well. Like this happens, Swami Dayanand uses this example, that in a class, Swamiji would crack some kind of a joke or something, and everybody else would be laughing. But this one person who has his mind on something else, he's writing notes, or worse still, that's supposing thinking of something else, he misses the joke. And when he sounds everybody laughing, he says, "What did he say?" So the other person can say, "You also, your ears are not working." So he says, No, I was listening to it, but I didn't. It was, the ears have to be backed by the mind. If the mind is not backing the ears don't see. Anyway, all I'm saying is that in the sense organs, they do not have swarupa, the ability to illuminate by all the sense organs, including the best sense organ that we are capable of, which is the mind. All the sense objects do not have an intrinsic ability to illuminate. They borrow the ability to illuminate from the Sakshi. A Sakshi, on the other hand, the ability to illuminate is its swarupa. That is the nature. And so the Sakshi here is none other than you. The self, the Atma is the Sakshi. You have an intrinsic ability to know. An intrinsic means the swarupa. That means that it is not borrowed from anything. This is an important thing to see. Already you can say you are very independent. Your ability to say that I see and I know is independent. And it is not as though it is a quality of yours. It is in fact you. So for example, when you say, I know, that knowledge, I know, that I know is your swarupa. The knowingness is your swarupa, it is not a swabhava. And the mind can say, I know. There's a conversation going on, and about all the protests and so on and so forth, and you can say, yes, I know. All the lockdowns and the number of lockdowns and the number of people who are in the hospital, I know. The mind knows. But really speaking, the Sakshi, or sometimes, you say, I don't know. You can even say, the mind says, I don't know. Do you know how many people have died in California? And if you're not from California, or even if you are, you can say, no, I don't know. It's some thousands, but I have no idea. And then we can say, how do you know that you don't know? Hey, don't say some silly things like that. I know. So the I-knowingness of the I is intrinsic to me. I know what I know. I know what I don't know. Everything in between, I know. And so the Sakshi, the Atma, is something which is the Swarupa of the Sakshi. The Sakshi is the Swarupa of the I. See this very clearly. We're not talking about some kind of a remote object that you have to get to know. This is you. It's just that I was not separating the Sakshi, the Swarupa from Swabhava, and getting it all mixed up. It's very much like, another example of this, and I'll close that loop in a minute, is that on a moonlight you see things very, very well. So is moon the originator of the light? No. As you know, moon borrows the light from the sun. Is the light of the sun borrowed from something else? No. Sun is the nature of heat and light. A very important step in the creation of the whole universe is the sun. Because it actually, nothing can happen without the sun. Nothing can get illuminated. There is no heat in the whole world. What a beautiful design. Swami Dayananda used to say that it is so precise that if for some reason the earth and the sun were farther apart, you will have chaos. You won't have enough heat. If they are any closer than what it is, you will not have the life, because everything will get burnt to ashes. This is so precise. And then the movement of the seasons. Yes, there is a summer. Yes, there is a winter. And all of this is so precise and created. Amazing. So the sun is the Swarupa of light. Everything else borrows, even the electricity, for example, the energy also comes from the sun. Similarly, it's very possible that the sunlight may be falling on a mirror, and the mirror has certainly illuminated the whole room. But as the sun moves, then the mirror loses the ability to reflect, and the room becomes dark. And so there's a big distinction between the sun, who has the Swarupa of the light, and everything else has the Swabhava of reflecting it. So the sunlight falls on a wall, and yes, it gets lighted to a certain degree. But if the wall has a mirror on it, then the reflection is of a different kind. So all differences happen in Swabhava. But in Swarupa, there is no difference, there's no changes. It is always there. And now this fact is pointed out precisely in the 5th verse. So we can actually jump to that, although there are some other things that I need to talk about. I will. But let's look at it. He says, Na udeti, na astameti esha, na udeti, na astameti esha, na vriddhim yati na kshayam. Swayam vibhati atha anyani bhasayet sadhanam vina. So now it's talking about the Swarupa of the Sakshi, the intrinsic nature of you. Not talking about some object called Sakshi that you have to say, where is Sakshi? I haven't seen Sakshi. My dear, you. So he says, na udeti. Amazing fact. Means it does not arise. Na astameti. It does not set. You know, this is interesting because in the sunrise and the sunset can happen. But for the sunrise and sunset to happen, you need a reference point. The reference point is that the United States in the morning, the sun rises. And on the other side of the earth, the sun is setting. So in one case it is rising, in one case it is setting. But does from the standpoint of the sun itself, you cannot ask him a question, send him a letter, Mr. Sun or Miss Sun, when do you rise? And the sun will reply to you, he says, I don't understand your question. There's no question of rising or... He says, no, yes there is. Because I've seen you rise. He says, well, you may see some kind of a relative experience. I have no idea you're talking about, but I don't rise. I don't... it's an interesting fact. I used to wonder about this until it was educated from others. Do you know that the astronauts, when they go to beyond the stratosphere into much more than that, I don't remember the names and all that, there's complete darkness. There's complete darkness. So I used to wonder, how is that possible? Because the sun illumines everything. So it should be a total daylight for the astronauts. There isn't. It's complete darkness. And you know the answer to that. And what it is, that the daylight is the sun hitting the air particles. And the particles, it is kind of like a small mirror. They are trillions of small mirrors in the form of air particles that reflect the sunlight. So even in the case of astronaut, if they have something that reflects the sun, then it is lighted. But in the dark space, there is no air particles, there is complete darkness. So even though the sun is there, but it doesn't appear to be. Anyway, going back to it, if you write to the sun and say, when do you rise, when do you... He says, I don't know what you're talking about. So no question of my rising or setting. I am what I am. I'm always shining. And then another important thing is to say, how do you know you're shining? How do you know you're shining? The sun says, I don't understand your question. No, because everything needs to be confirmed. You know, if everything needs to have a witness. So who has seen that you are not rising? How can you confirm that? Sun says, please don't waste my time. Don't waste my time. All these silly questions, you kind of figure it out yourself. I don't need anything to tell me I am shining. Is that clear or what? I am self-shining. You know, this is a very important point, really. Because as we progress, you will see that the Atma the self, the you, doesn't need to be proven by anyone. You don't need to, and this is the issue. Because you say, how do I know? How can I see myself? Yeah, this will go into more detail later on. But you don't need to. What you do need to do, because you will say, well, I don't get it. Because the fact that I am self-shining and I am self-existing, as we will see in a minute, I don't get it. So just as an introduction, I'm bringing in some other aspects to that. The Shastra says the entire role of the teaching is in the form of negation, not in the form of proving that you are. This is what is called Neti Neti iti Adesha. It is a famous mantra which says Neti Neti, Naiti Naiti. Naiti Naiti means it has two forms, twice it is repeated. And so one is physical forms and one is Sukshma Sharira, one is Sthula Sharira, one Neti is for Sthula Sharira, and one is for Sukshma Sharira. That the I, you're looking at yourself either in the Sthula Sharira or the Sukshma Sharira. You're looking at yourself as a visible, as a happening thing. I need to know that I am the body. Not need to know, but I know that I am the body or the mind. This is all that you know. And Shastra says, you are none of those. Then who am I? I need to know myself. How are you going to know yourself? Are you going to, does the sun need another sun to illuminate it? So now we can go back to the analysis of the Sakshi in a minute. That if you say the rule was up until now, Rupam Drishyam Lochanam Drik. Tad Drishyam Driktu Manasam. Drishyaha Dhivrittaya Sakshi Natu Drigeva Tu Natu Drishyate. So if the rule was that whoever is the seer also becomes a seen. Why? Because you have to prove the existence of the seer. And that makes sense. Everything has to be proven. How do I prove? So there has to be something that is a seer. So in the case of the sense organs, the mind is the seer. And in the case of the mind, the Sakshi is the seer. And if the Sakshi is the seer, then who becomes the Sakshi for the seer? Who becomes the seer of the Sakshi? There must be another Sakshi. If you continue to do this, you will never get anything done. This is like in the bureaucratic government field, especially in India, that for those of us from there, we will recognize it, but everybody does. You send some petition for starting a business, and you give it to the clerk of the office, and you say, I want to start a business, and he says, okay, here's a form, fill it out and send it and give it to me. So he gives it. He says, when can I come back? And he says, well, come back in 3 days, and then we'll let you know. So the guy says, 3 days, I have to start a business. Anyway, I'll wait for. So you come back in 3 days. And he says, well, so the fellow says, well, I sent your file to my supervisor. So let me check with him. So he goes to the supervisor and he says, he has sent it to his supervisor. Because this is a big business, we have to really go through it. So when do I come back? Well, 7 days, because the officer is on duty. The officer is on vacation, not on duty. Oh, I have to wait for another month, another week or so. So now I come back after 1 week and he says, can you please find out? He says, well, the top boss has given it to the absolute director of the office to look at. If this happens, it will, and so now it's an unless process. If somebody has to look at somebody else to fill the, somebody else has to be, or to okay the file, how is it ever going to be done? It will always be in the process. So similarly here also, if every sense organ and other things need another Sakshi, and if the Sakshi also needs another Sakshi, so you are saying, I have to, is this a friend or not? Is this an enemy or a friend? He says, wait, we'll check with somebody. He says, okay, well, let me know quickly because I have, this person is threatening. And I don't know whether he's joking or is he serious. So I need to know very quickly. It's like I'm starting a business. So he says, wait, I understand. We'll get back to you. And the Sakshi says, well, I need the concurrence of somebody else to say that I'm the Sakshi, that I have the ability to do so. Nothing will get done. The whole creation will come to a stop. And so there comes a point, as the Western says, the buck stops here. The buck stops here means that there is a person who doesn't have a boss. And that is the Sakshi, that is you. And that Sakshi has to be explained to your own mind. And once you do, so here the point is, then so to close the original argument, and this is the issue that we have, is that how do I know that I'm free? It says, praptasya praptihi. We've gone through this. You're already free, but you don't know it. But how will I know that I'm free? I have to see myself. It's just like saying, how do I know that I'm self-shining? I need another sun to shine on me. So same issue. It becomes an infinite regress. You get another sun to shine on this and say, how do I know that I'm illuminating this? You need another sun to illuminate sun number 2. Who illuminates sun number 1? The sun says, this is all silly. I don't need to sort of turn my eyes inside and out and so on. I am the very nature of illumination. And if the sun, for example, has an inferiority complex, let's just assume for a minute that the sun is aware of himself. Let's say it's a male. I'm aware of myself, and I have an inferiority complex. That I am, somebody needs to really illuminate me and so on and so forth. Then some teaching has to be given to the sun. Don't you see, you fool, you are self-illuminating. Na udeti na astameti esha, na vriddhim yati na kshayam. You don't change, don't you see, you never change. How do I know that I don't change? How do you know that I don't change? Prove it to me. Because if you were to change, someone would have to witness you as a changing Sakshi. In fact, this argument applies to all aspects of the Sakshi. Na udeti. It doesn't rise. How do you know that I don't rise? Because in order to know that you were born, you will need another person which says, this consciousness is now born. Consciousness. I'm not talking about a embodied baby. Because then you can say that, yeah, my mom, this happens all the time for our astrological, this happened recently to one of my family members, that she was having some issues, and so we sent her horoscope to all the pandits, and the pandit said, tell me exactly when she was born and where. It has to be very precise. And so we looked at them, asked their parents, and says, oh, she was born on something, at what time? 7 in the morning, I think it was. Okay, yeah, 7 in the morning. 7 in the morning on such and such date. So she has to witness the birth of the baby. She only witnesses the birth of the baby, not consciousness. There is only one consciousness. Because if the consciousness also becomes an object, then it loses its ability to be a Sakshi. How does it lose the ability to become a Sakshi? Definition we started in the very beginning of the class. Sakshat ananya apekshaya, without any other help. And so this is also given in the second line of verse number 5. He says, Na udeti na astameti esha na vriddhim yati. Doesn't increase. Na kshayam. It does not decrease. How do I know that? You just look at your own consciousness. You are conscious of the fact that you were a baby. It's interesting. I sometimes think about it. I don't remember when I was a complete baby, but I do remember early on in my life about, I'm seeing myself. And some of the experiences, really the traumatic experience for us was when we went to school. That I'll never forget. The whole scene and the smell of the books, honestly, it's just like yesterday. I don't remember anything from yesterday, but I remember the one from, I won't tell you my age, a long time ago. And I remember my mother left me in the school, and so I said, where are you going? She says, I'll see you in the evening. I said, oh my God. And the kids all around me, and the teacher trying to make it's very fresh in my mind. So that's Sakshi. And then all throughout the life, when I was sick, and so on, that Sakshi is the same Sakshi. It's not that I was a young Sakshi and an old Sakshi. If I'm sick now and if I'm unhappy now, it's the same Sakshi. Na udeti na astameti esha na vriddhim yati na kshayam. Swayam vibhati atha anyani sadhanam vina. So this is the same thing as ananya apekshaya. Means that without anybody else's help, it just shines by itself. And if it is self-effulgent, it is also self-existing, isn't it? The self-existence, which is given by the word Swayambhu, Swayam Bhavati iti Swayambhu. So, what is self-existent, which is you? Swayam self, you don't need anything. Sakshi doesn't need any food. It does not depend on anything. The person needs a food, the body needs a food, but the Sakshi doesn't need any food to exist. Self-existing. Self-aware. Self-illumination. This is the Sakshi. This is what you are. Not an ordinary thing. The implications of this are just mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. You are in fact the very nature of the whole, the very content of the whole creation. And so here in the this is given again and again in different contexts. So in the Kathopanishad, Mundaka Upanishad, Tameva bhantam anubhati sarvam, tasya bhasa sarvamidam vibhati. That you are the original illuminator, and by your illumination, it is all the other successive things borrow your illumination and use it for a specific purpose. Exactly like electricity and an appliance. So the electricity is independent of the appliance, because it is the very it's a different ball game. You know, if it's very possible that you may have some appliance that is on the same level as some other appliance. One can be a heater, one can be an air conditioner. But the electricity that powers both of them is independent of both of them. It was there even before the appliance utilized it, and it is there while the appliance is working. It needs the electricity, and it is there when the appliance breaks down. It's a different vision altogether. There's no difference between electricity and the appliance. And one other similarity, if you want to do that, the electricity is invisible. Is invisible. At least you can see that it's not a perfect example, because the electricity also needs to be guided in wires and all those kinds of things. Whereas in the case of Sakshi, it is always there. And that confuses us. This is the thing. That really, if something which is always there, then you don't notice it. As we were discussing this in the Purusha Suktam class, that really speaking, what you find is that sunlight is there in all the various shapes. So when you have a dark surface, it means that the light is being absorbed by the dark surface, doesn't reflect it back, therefore it looks dark to you. But it's really the light which is make it into a dark subject and a light subject. Anyway, so what it means is that the original one which lights up everything is you. And the whole world depends on you to light up. This is a fact. And we say, what, me? Yes. The implications are just absolutely phenomenal. So, this is the situation that we find ourselves. And let's see if I wanted to bring up some other points. So yeah, one other interesting thing to see. This is the definition of inertness and consciousness. Inert and conscious. So, the inert and conscious doesn't mean that some things are inert and other things are conscious. The definition of inertness and consciousness is the following. An inert object is the one that cannot independently illumine, whose swabhava is illumination but not the swarupa. So in that sense, our sense organs, so I can ask you a question now. Are your sense organ inert or conscious? Just think about that. So for instance, a table is inert. You can bang on the table and it doesn't complain. And if I do the same thing to you as a body, you'll say, what are you doing? You're hurting me. So very obviously it means that your body is not inert. Why? Because you're complaining. If you were not complaining, then my idea was you're inert. Shastra says this is not a pure definition of inertness. Then what? The pure inertness definition is if you are not independently conscious, you are inert. You are borrowing from something else. This is like saying an appliance can do a lot of things. It's moving around, there's a fan, all that, so on and so forth. But it is still inert. As soon as the electricity leaves, it just stops. Same thing happens to a person who is dying. The Atma ceases to reflect in that body. In the last, I think, 7-8 years, I mean, that didn't happen to me for a long time, but somehow or the other, for whatever reason, in the last several years, maybe 10 years, I must have seen several people die in front of me when I was there. It's a fascinating thing. One moment, the body is alive, and the next moment, it is gone. And this is the same body, same hands and legs and eyes and so on. But as soon as the reflection of the Atma ceases, the Atma leaves that body. Atma cannot go anywhere. It is always, Sakshi means it's always there. But the reflection of it, so it's kind of like, the electricity may still be flowing through the instrument. But something goes wrong in the instrument, this instrument stops. Doesn't mean the electricity is not there. So one important thing to see is that the definition of inertness is not the ability to not reflect at all. It means anything which doesn't have its own reflection, own ability not reflection, own ability to illuminate is inert. So from that definition, as we will see more clearly, I'm putting a lot of stuff in a very short amount of time. Atma is the only conscious entity in the whole world. The whole world. All world means all your experiences. You as a person is also inert. Others as a person are also inert. They don't have the ability to be on their own because they are reflecting your consciousness. Same thing in the fourth verse of Dakshinamurti Stotram that we finished. Nana Chidragato Darasthita Mahadeepa Prabhabhaswaram Jnanam Yasya Tu Chakshuradhikarana Dwara Bahispandate Janamiti Tameva Bhantam Anubhati Etat Samastam Jagat Tasmai Shri Guru Murtaye Namaidam Shri Dakshinamurtaye. So it says that Tameva Bhantam Anubhati Etat Samastam. By its own shining, everything else borrows the ability and has some transactional ability, like an appliance. But the Sakshi remains the same, unaffected by any of this. Anyway, so we may have a few more words. I will look at to see if some concepts need to be brought out. But other than that, the central theme of the entire book of Drsya Viveka is at least complete as a unit. This is the 5 verses. That really you are different from all the experiences. You can never be experienced. You are the very nature of the experience. You don't need to look at yourself. Anyway, this is complicated, but we will go into all of that in the future. But at least now one unit is complete. And I think what we might do is, as I promised to you, we will do a meditation when a unit is complete. So we will probably start a meditation next session, and then go on to the other aspects that we want to look at. So with that, let me close the class. Om Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. All right. Let's see if any questions. Shantikumar asks, Sakshi being unchanging witness consciousness remembers events from childhood till now, but does Sakshi store the experience or the mind? So yeah, the Sakshi cannot have all the storage and recollection, etc. is all done by the mind. The Sakshi is not involved with that. So it is the mind that does that, and the Sakshi essentially powers the mind to remember, powers the mind to recollect, powers the mind to sometimes forget or to remember. All of those kinds of things are done by the Sukshma Sharira alone. And so this is what happens, that from one... So if you look at the two things, one is the night, sleep during the night, and the other one is death of a body. So if you look at both of them, they're very similar. There's not much difference between them. So what happens is that in the night time, the mind itself goes to sleep, what is called laya. And so when it goes to sleep, then there is no storage. There may be storage, but there's no recollection of any ideas. It's not there. And the Sakshi is there, and he says, this guy is sleeping. But Sakshi doesn't change. Still the same Sakshi always. Then when you wake up, then you recollect some of the things, and the Sukshma Sharira becomes active again. The same thing is there from one life to the other. When you die, then the Sukshma Sharira is still there, but the Sthula Sharira has to be changed. All the gross body has to be changed, but the Sukshma Sharira is still there, and then you recollect some things in terms of your inner wealth, but all the outer wealth is forgotten, because otherwise Ishvara says it'll get too complicated. If you can hardly even keep up with this life in terms of your spouse and children, if you have to start worrying about the last 1,000 different lives of different spouses and so on, you'll go crazy. Your spouse says, hey, did you bring the vegetables? And he says, oh my gosh, I forgot, I was thinking of my previous life. This marriage is not going to last very much. So you can't do that. So anyway, so there is a purposeful forgetfulness, but there are some other aspects that are kept, and those aspects are the inner wealth, which means your tolerance, your love, or the lack thereof. Those continue on in the Sukshma Sharira. So all, anyway, to answer your question, all happenings are always in the mind. The Sakshi simply illumines it. Yeah. Suzanne Narayan says, how does consciousness differ from the introspection or metacognition, thinking about our own thoughts? So the introspection and metacognition are all done by the mind. So mind also has different layers. There is a conscious mind, there is a subconscious mind. All those kinds of variations are there in the mind. And the Sakshi is, so that is kind of like that's all part of the instrument. It may be subtle instrument. This is kind of like software. But the electricity simply, so software means that there may be some invisible aspects of the computer. One is the hardware, which the electricity also illumines, powers, and there may be some software that also is powered by the electricity. So the introspection and all those other things are all part of the instrument, not part of the electricity. Shanti Kumar says, another 12 hours we in India are going to witness solar eclipse. Really? I didn't know that. Interesting. I think those were the only questions that I see. I'll wait for a while. Quite a few people. Really very happy about many of the Western people joining this class, thanks to Ramananji. That's wonderful, really, because that's one of the things that I kind of missed in the first part of my teaching. It was that most of the students were Indians, and not as though there is a big difference between them, but I think in terms of commonness of the identity of the commonness between people, it enhances when you have people from different countries and different. So, yeah, very nice to see Anita from Germany, and it's also so Henry Heikkinen from here, close by. And Shri Greenbaum, Nancy Preston, Laurel Donovan, Camille Coates. Very nice, very happy to have you participate in this class. Let me see if any more questions came up. You're welcome, Varun. I'm glad you got the book. Okay, Natalia also. Good. All right. Thank you all, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Om.